Loud and Quiet presents Midnight Chats.
Hey, good evening everybody, and thank you for downloading episode 52 of the Loud and Quiet interview podcast Midnight Chats. It's midnight, it's Thursday, and here we are again with another episode. This is episode 2 of season 6, or series 6, as us Brits say. We've only just gone to the series model. We were just putting them all out, but we're on a series now. Episode 1 of this series was last week. If you missed that episode, that was with Interpol. Greg did that one. This week is my week. My name's Stuart Stubbs and I am the editor of Loud and Quiet magazine. Now, a lot of people that listen to the podcast might not know that Loud and Quiet is also a music magazine. So, and we're terrible at plugging it. We don't mention it enough, or at least we feel that we don't. So we're going to try to plug it a little bit. So if you are unfamiliar with that side of what we do, please do check it out. loudandquiet.com is where you can order a copy of not just our latest issue, but old issues. There's 124 that we've done over the last 14 years or so. So please do check it out. If you like the podcast, you may well like the magazine as well. It's pretty much a print version of what this podcast is. It features a lot of the same artists or similar artists. But seeing as we're here for the podcast now, let me introduce tonight's guest. Chili Gonzales currently lives in Cologne in Germany, but he's originally from Montreal in Canada. The story of Chili, or Gonzo as he likes to be called, and how he introduces himself to people, is he was a band guy essentially. He had a band called Sun, spelled S-O-N, and they were doing pretty well. They signed a big record deal in 1995, and as far as he was concerned, that was kind of that his future was mapped out. But it didn't work out for him. It wasn't what he wanted it to be. So in 1999, he became Chili Gonzales essentially, and he pretty much reverted back to his roots as a virtuoso piano player, and also pursued his love of rap music. So since then, he's pretty much straddled those two worlds. Sometimes he makes a record that is full of beautiful piano, and sometimes he makes a record that's like a rap record. And he's done loads of other things on top of this. He writes songs for a lot of other people, including Feist, Peaches. He's written songs for Drake. He won a Grammy for his work on Random Access Memories by Daft Punk. He's been in a film. He's what else has he done? He's broken a world record for the longest ever solo performance. These are all things that I probably should have spoken to him about, and we do touch on a couple of them, but as is the way with Midnight Chats, we kind of just drifted from one topic to the next. I really enjoyed talking to Chili, and I wanted to meet him since I spoke to him on the phone last year. We did a cover feature with him and Jarvis Cocker about an album that they put out last year called Room 29, which was a concept record they wrote at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles, the hotel there. And I didn't get to meet Chili at that point because he was back home in Cologne. I had to speak to him on the phone. I'm glad that we managed to get him. I managed to get into a room with him and talk to him. He's an energizing guy, and I hope you get that from this. He's got a new record that came out 2 weeks ago called Solo Piano 3. It's essentially what it says on the tin. It's the sound of a piano, and it's the third record that he's done like that. It's the final one he says that he's going to do of just him and piano. It's a beautiful record. If you're listening to Midnight Chats at midnight or late at night, then that is a great record to play around this time. I will leave you now with myself and Chili Gonzales. We will be back next week. We have another great guest next week. I won't say who it is, but I think we've got some really good people coming up on season or series 6 of Midnight Chats. For now, though, thank you for listening to episode 52 with Chili Gonzales.
I'm very different after dark, and so you're going to get a different side as opposed to a morning interview where it would be, a whole other ballgame.
A whole different thing.
My guard is down.
Yeah.
The intimacy level is turned up.
We're
in front of a fireplace. We're on a bearskin rug.
Yeah, we've got pipes.
We've got pipes.
And
we're both wearing dressing gowns.
Of course. So this is going to be, I'm not sure what number of the podcast this will be. At this point in time, we've recorded 50 of these. But I think you are the first person we've had on who is a Guinness Book World Record holder.
Well, former. I'm sad
to
say. It's been broken since, I played for 27 hours and change back in 2009.
Yeah.
Those records are broken pretty frequently. So I believe just a few years later, I became aware of I believe it was like a sitar player, because I had the record for the longest solo concert. It wasn't piano specific. Guinness determined that you can't have a separate record for every instrument,
Sure, yeah.
So it was the longest solo concert that I had the record for, and that was broken by a mile. I mean, this sitar player went like 38 hours plus or something.
Whoa. Okay, so it's kind of out of reach maybe for a while.
But don't you think a sitar player has an unfair advantage because it's kind of trance-like music to begin with?
That's true.
I play like miniatures. I play like 2.5, 3 minute long pop songs on the piano, essentially. Yeah. So I thought, well, he's probably used to just zoning out and playing for hours and hours and hours.
For all we know, the audience might have zoned out so much. He might have stopped for an hour. They might have just thought.
Well, silence is music, as John Cage taught us.
There you go.
So we start to get into very abstract territory.
It's early to go there.
There was a provision in the Guinness World Record kind of contract, and it was very hard to define, but it said something like, you have to perform what can be considered universally as music. Because what they want to avoid is some maybe conceptual artist just going ding 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 for 28 hours.
Sure.
And saying, oh no, that's music.
That counts.
And that's an argument. What is music is a whole other question. So Guinness sort of had to put some provision in there to say, look, it has to be like what most people would consider to be music, otherwise we're not going to certify it.
So when you did 27 hours.
That's
what was the record that you were beating? Can you remember?
26.
Okay.
I only added an hour to it. I mean, it was more like, it just felt good. Okay, there was 26. I'll do 27.
I'll do 27.
I just, inched over the finish line.
What made you want to do it? Can you remember? What was it that made you think?
Ego. I mean, basically at that point, I was coming off of a bit of a botched album cycle, an album called Soft Power, where I decided to sort of sing and sort of pay tribute to the sort of yacht rock, soft rock sensibility of my very, very early years. At that point, I was really obsessed with, what music do you hear before you have the self-consciousness of taste? And for me, that was, Bee Gees, Billy Joel, the stuff that my sister liked, the stuff that when I was just, 6 or 7 years old, just like seeing on the TV for the first time. And I was sort of like, let me get closer to that. Let me get closer to the real DNA of my musical being, pre-taste, pre-self-image, choosing the musical taste based on sort of defining yourself against your older brother or whatever. In that moment, you're just an innocent, naive sponge. And what I was absorbing was this 70s soft rock, what I would call now, music of the elite in a way.
Yeah.
Long studio sessions lasting months and months and months, perfection, orchestras, beautiful performances by session musicians, all that stuff. And unfortunately, I didn't feel like I could just stand behind that album. And so I kind of, in retrospect, might have been self-sabotaging it a bit. And the way I presented the album in terms of promotion and being on stage was sort of working against maybe that naivete that I was looking for when I recorded the album. so it was a very weird mixed message, I think, and some people didn't know if it was literally a joke album or whether it just was sort of a misplaced sort of combination of presentation and content. But whatever the case, I was frustrated and I felt like I had distanced myself from what really makes me unique. And I was kind of looking for some gesture for myself that would sort of jolt me awake in a strange sense. And I think I saw something about a Guinness World Record, and I remembered how I loved those books when I was a kid, and seeing the guy with 200 cigarettes in his mouth and all that stuff, the guy with long fingernails, all those famous Guinness World Records. I thought, oh, this is kind of like brings back the sort of musical athlete part of what I do, and a sort of surreal, extreme performance that maybe only Chili Gonzales really could do. And so I just sort of put that show together and decided to go for it. And all the preparation that I should have been doing, I didn't really end up doing, because I ended up doing promotion. And
Right.
But what keeps you going through 27 hours, it's ego. Like, I just couldn't do it now because I don't feel the same need to press reset on my career. I feel like my expectations and the reality are in harmony. So right now I think, oh my goodness, playing 27 hours. I mean, I play 2.5 hour, 3 hour concerts semi-regularly, but to really go all the way and do something so extreme, it can only be a product of ego.
What are the actual rules of that record? Is it that are you allowed a certain amount of intervals, or did you literally just have to play? Is there like a limit on the gaps between the songs when a song stops and when you have to start playing again? Is that all? There
is a limit on the gap, and I of course would play with that. I would tell the people in the audience, of course, to make it a bit meta. Yeah. I would say, all right, guys, we have 15 seconds. Nobody clap for 15 seconds. Let's just push this to the limit. Let me squeeze out as many seconds as I can. So it was fun to play with those limits. I also could take 5 minutes an hour or accumulate them. So the way I worked it out is because as I said, 3 hour concert is fairly regular occurrence for me, in that sort of Springsteen-esque approach to an all-enveloping concert that begins usually in pure music and my piano repertoire, and then slowly cycles through some master classes, and then ends up with the rap material, and then give some lessons, get some people to come on stage and give music lessons, and then bring out some of my other musicians, and then we take it to a sort of rolling boil. And that 3 hour concert was basically the unit of the Guinness World Record concert times 9.
Right.
And I took a 15-minute break between each of those 3 hour units.
Okay.
That was the way I conceived it. So after having done 5 of those, I was like, okay, 5 3 hour concerts down, and 4 to go.
So what did you do after 27? So you finish, you decide, you get to the end and you go, right, I feel I've done enough. I think you went just over.
That's right. I went 11 minutes past 27. Yeah, exactly.
And then
my body gave out. I think it was like you make a deal with yourself in a way. Like I said, it's so much to do with ego and adrenaline. It's not really about what is the actual physical body capable of. It's more about what can the brain push the body to do that the brain needs. So when 27 hours came along, I'm like, oh, I'm going further. This is going to be even more extreme. I can't stop.
Yeah.
And then honestly, 7 or 8 minutes after, I was like, oh, no. My body is really sending me them. Everything started to hurt. I started to cramp up. And it was because I had made a deal with myself for these 27 hours. And I wrapped it up 3-4 minutes afterwards. I think it was 27:11 finally. Yeah. And so my secret wish to go like 28, maybe 29, and just make people go, oh my God, he can't stop. I didn't quite manage it because the contract was due,
Yeah. Did you end in a kind of like really elaborate way, or did you just kind of collapse on the keys?
Well, my team came out and were spreading confetti at 27 hours, and then they kind of stayed on stage for those 11 minutes. Okay. And I believe I finished with my piece Chili in F minor, which was the first piece on my first album, which felt like a nice way to sort of wrap it up. And I remember having sort of one arm in the air and just sort of playing some crazy cadenza with my left hand. But yeah, it was all a blur at that point.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, obviously that's a really extreme example, but it does play into your approach to concerts anyway. I mean, last year when we spoke on the phone for the magazine, we were talking about how you like to play with the perception of what is a gig and what is a show, and kind of mess with the parameters of a gig. You don't want to just play you don't play normal gigs anyway, do you? I guess the story that you told me that I found really funny is how you, during your show, you'll do the pop masterclass, that element of it where you kind of deconstruct a pop song, and you told me a story about how you would, at a particular show, you had a string quartet and you got them to play a section of Eleanor Rigby, but you, at the end of that, you kind of said to the audience, well, you'll all know that song, that was Elizabeth Ridley by the Rolling Stones, and then you carry on and explain about and deconstruct that song and just carry on and just carry on.
I mean, I guess that's just pure trolling in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's yes. So in that moment, I guess I'm not content to quite let it go. The masterclass would already be quite entertaining for people, I think, in that moment, because I'm sort of bringing the curtain back, and I have the quartet there to illustrate, like, listen to the rhythmic way that the strings are being used here. This is more using the string quartet as a rhythm section than as just some lovely chords and some, melancholy moods, as strings are commonly used. And it's true that, Paul McCartney was kind of a visionary for being able to think, okay, this is a pop song, but it's going to have a string quartet instead of drums, bass, guitar. That's already kind of, I'm already ahead, so to speak. And it's true that I have this tendency to want to sort of just change the frame one more time. And that's, yes, the source of sort of wanting to mislabel it and to almost, in that moment when they think, wow, this guy's a real expert of music, he's a real font of knowledge, he really must know his stuff. And in that moment they go, oh, come on.
He's got the name
and
wrong.
some, of course, believe it. I probably told you on the phone, I'll get messages on Facebook where people say, great show, but just so you know, here's a YouTube video, you did mislabel it. And I guess I always feel like there's always this extra little frame you can change at the end, and that's maybe thinking a little bit more like a comedian does, where they sort of have a setup of a joke and the punchline often involves you sort of having to revise your feeling about that story right at the very end, and maybe that's what that is. The punchline isn't to actually hear the quartet play Eleanor Rigby. The punchline is the musical genius mislabeling it.
Gets it wrong. I like the fact that it's almost it's a joke for you. It's a joke for one, in a way, isn't it? Because you did that to kind of mislead the audience and kind of just change the atmosphere in the room a little bit and just tweak it so that people think, oh, this guy doesn't know absolutely everything, or gives the audience like a little one-upmanship on you and thinking like, I know that song, he's got that wrong.
I know he's wrong. And that's literally the definition of dramatic irony. So not in the Alanis Morissette sense of it's a day where you don't want it to rain and it rains. That's not truly ironic, as many people are often correcting their friends.
Yeah.
Dramatic irony, in the terms of Aristotelian Greek drama, is when essentially the audience knows more than the characters do. And in that moment, the character of Chili Gonzales knows less than they do because he thinks it's a Rolling Stones song.
Yeah.
And I love creating that true dramatic irony because it gets the antennas of the audience up and they'll listen to the next song in a different way. I've definitely gone too far and done things that are only too provocative, and they'll remember the show, but they might not remember the music. So I'm always trying to sort of toe that line.
What have you done that's gone too far in what things have you done that you can remember?
Well, just some confrontational things, perhaps, where I really sort of had an adversarial relationship with the audience, or maybe one particular audience member who won't play along in some way, and I'll decide to sort of make an issue of it. And we say drive into the skid when you're on the road and you're driving on ice. And I'd like to drive into the skid. So if there's a bit of a strange, awkward, ill, dodgy energy in the room, I tend to run towards it rather than try to ignore it. And if you run towards it, then you have the chance to sort of take it on for the audience, so to speak. And then maybe you can turn your show into something very positive by the end. However, when you drive into the skid, sometimes you never really get out of it. And there have been shows where it just ends on a dodgy, strange, ill, unresolved, mood where perhaps the audience truly is confused and maybe truly dislikes me in some way.
Bit upset.
And
have those people ever got in touch?
you know what? When I do those shows, musicians in the audience tell me it's the best show they've seen of me.
Really?
Yeah, I'll just do one of those shows, and then it's the musicians who will say, "Oh my God, I've seen you 6 times when you've come to Hamburg, but what you did last night, that was the." But that's maybe the insider thing of musicians who love to see sort of something that wouldn't normally happen at a concert. A truly uncomfortable, unresolved moment of confrontation is pretty rare in a music concert.
Sure, yeah.
And so that, I guess that's why the musicians like it. And of course, Hamburg, I had a very intense confrontation with a dude who just wouldn't get up on stage for his music lesson. And usually I have all these ways, I can kind of get the audience to sort of clap for them, and then the pressure of the audience tends to get them up. Okay, if that doesn't work, I can go towards some other arguments, and then at some point I start to sort of really antagonize the person, in hopes that they'll finally, I think they have to come on stage. This is the only way that this tension gets resolved. And in Hamburg at this jazz festival, like back in 2013, he just wouldn't come on stage. He just wouldn't. And I didn't let it go, and I stopped. I was probably 3/4 of the way done through the concert. It must have gone on for 12, 15 minutes. And there were people really standing up, and, there were Germans saying like, "We like your music, not your statements." This lady got up, and when I go to Hamburg now and do promo or do concerts, really at least a few people will mention this. They'll say, "Oh, so no big confrontation tonight, huh?" And I'm like, "Look, that's not my first choice. My first choice is peace and love with a few little ill moments, harmless ill moments sprinkled in, But like I said, if the mood really goes there, then I'm going to go there too."
It is like a comedian. Like there are certain comedians that kind of have that same approach of, especially because comedian culture in the UK at least there is like a heckle culture, and there is part of that kind of back and forth with the audience. Who is your what comedians or comedy generally, like growing up? Where does your kind of comedy loves lie?
Well, I grew up watching pretty mainstream television as a kid. And I guess the only comedians I really became aware of was a little bit later. As I started to be on stage, I got more interested, and I became a big disciple of Andy Kaufman.
Okay.
And, he borders on, of course, performance art. He just happened to sort of choose the world of comedy to be a performance artist in. Much as today you might say the same about people like Nathan Fielder or Eric Andre, to whom I dedicated one of the pieces on Solo Piano 3, actually. The piece Chico is dedicated to him because I feel like he's a little bit the Chico Marx of today. And I love it when you could just imagine, an Eric. Do you know Eric Andre's work? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
So if you go online, check out what he does. He has a show on Adult Swim. Okay, and it's a very energetic, unhinged, intense show. For the first 30 seconds that I saw it, I thought, oh hell no, I'm not going to make it through 2 minutes of this. It's way too aggressive. And then I got lulled into this hypnotic state, and it weirdly, it relaxes me.
Really?
But if you were to imagine those shows, which I think are 10, 11 minutes each episode, if you were to imagine those hanging on a screen in the Guggenheim, you could easily think of it as a document of very cutting-edge performance art. I like that blurry line between conceptual performance art and comedy. And I like to bring that into the concert hall where I am and play with the conventions of a concert hall. I don't like playing in art galleries because everyone will say, oh, I know what he's doing. But if you do it in a Philharmony in Germany, or if you do it, at Cadogan Hall, where people are used to understanding, oh, I come here for feel-good Christmas classical concerts and things like that, all of a sudden you have a chance to really, really mess with people's heads because you're in the real world. And I don't like art when it hangs in a gallery. I like art as it exists in the real world. Yesterday, I was in, I think it's Hyde Park, and I saw that giant thing from Christo. There's this looks like a candy pyramid or something in the middle of the water there, and you can take a boat and get really, really close to it. And I loved it. I like to see art. I like to just turn a corner and be like, aliens, hello. I love that feeling much more so than like going to the Tate and seeing that exact same pyramid in a giant room. just wouldn't do it for me, because the frame of a gallery, it's too obvious. We expect crazy things. We expect to sort of maybe be shocked or provoked, and we can always rationalize it. Well, we're in an art gallery. But if that's happening in a concert hall where you're used to seeing musicians be so respectful, and then there's a musician being so disrespectful, sweating, spitting, sitting there, swearing, slippers, bathrobe, the whole thing.
Yeah.
That has a chance of being mildly transgressive in 2018. To do the same thing if I was playing in the Tate Modern, it's just not going to be subversive or transgressive in the least.
Do you know Stuart Lee at all, the British comedian?
No, but just the other day I was asking someone for their British comedy recommendations, and he was on that list. So
yeah.
I'm going to check him out very soon.
He's like, I think you'd be into him. He's got a kind of, I suppose he is like he's kind of like the liberal elites comedian guy, really. He's like anti-TV. He doesn't do much TV. He's not like, he's a snob. He's a total comedy snob, but he's got this, I suppose the way to describe him in a nutshell, although this isn't what he's all about, he kind of has a thing where he repeats a joke, and they're quite abstract, they're quite weird and abstract, but he will repeat it for like 15 minutes. So it goes, there's a point where he's repeating the same thing, and it's funny. Then you have to basically sit out a period where you're sick of it and it's not funny anymore until it comes around to being funny.
So it's like Philip Glass humor.
Yeah, it kind of is. Yeah.
Because Philip Glass literally, when they talk about minimalist music, often the music is not as repetitive as it seems. Like Steve Reich, the music evolves quite a bit.
Yeah.
Terry Riley, it evolves. Philip Glass is a different bird. He actually repeats things, and the change happens in the mind of the listener. So that's, I guess, the sort of...
Yeah, that's a really good comparison. I think you'd be into him. Did you watch talking about Andy Kaufman, did you see the Jim Carrey, not the film of Man in the Moon, but there's a documentary about the making of it?
I was not very convinced. I did not feel that Jim Carrey really internalized what Andy Kaufman was really about. And he focused on some of the more superficial aspects of just the outward shocking nature of what Andy Kaufman was a very positive performance artist to me. He created very positive energy through letting out his monster once in a while. But essentially, as I see myself as well, you're there to create positive energy. Otherwise, it doesn't really work. I mean, not counting the occasional confrontation with a stoic German who refuses to get on stage. Fundamentally, I believe I'm there to create positive energy. It's what I strive to do, and I really think Andy Kaufman did that also.
I felt like from the documentary, it did feel like Jim Carrey was just using it as a really good excuse to really piss everyone off.
Exactly right. That's what I felt as well. He was sort of being a bit opportunistic with what he thought the Andy Kaufman frame would let him do.
In previous interviews of yours that I've read and seen online and things, is the debate between an entertainer and an artist. And you consider yourself an entertainer.
Yes, but I think entertainer includes artist. That's
Sure.
the thing. I think if you're an entertainer, they say that, like, what do they say? A conservative is a liberal who got mugged or something, Okay. So you're a liberal until... someone robs you, and then all of a sudden you're like, get these criminals all in jail, because it's finally touched you personally.
Sure.
In another way, I believe an entertainer is an artist who understood that they don't exist without the audience. And the minute you sort of switch that in your mind and think, oh, everything I do on my own is just preparation, and the actual thing I do only happens when there's an audience there, then I think you just instantly become an entertainer. Not in the sense of pander to people, lowest common denominator, this will work, I'll just say the name of the town I'm in and they're all going to cheer. That's not what I mean by entertainment. Entertainment for me is essentially the strange seeming contradiction between being larger than life, but very, very intimate with the audience. And the way you do that, I think, is by showing people your fantasies. That's what I observed David Bowie do. No one said David Bowie's inauthentic, although if you really look at how he was dressed as Ziggy Stardust, you're kind of like, okay, how come we feel so connected to him despite that? Well, it's because he has this fantasy that he's sort of not of this earth. He feels like he doesn't belong. It's actually extremely poetic to sort of take on the role of an alien who's observing these humans and feeling not at home. And that to me was really touching, despite the fact that it seemed almost ridiculous, superficially. And I feel that to incarnate the musical genius, it's a fantasy. I don't think I'm a musical genius. I would love to be one. In my fantasies, I have this impunity. And the impunity comes because everyone will allow a musical genius to do whatever he or she wants. So that's the fantasy I live out. And the strange thing is, when you get on stage, people tend to play along in a way, and therefore it kind of reinforces it. So there are moments where you can start to believe your own fantasy, and that's, of course, where it can get, I guess, complicated for people like David Bowie. But for me, I guess the rappers were the ones who, in a more concrete way, in the late 90s, served as my main inspiration. I think that's why I decided to apply the rapper's playbook to being a piano player, essentially, which is to say, show your monster.
Sure.
Don't believe that you have to only show the sides of you that will make you well liked, or don't think that by simultaneously sharing, fairly conscious and positive thoughts along with very negative exhibits of self-loathing, that only creates more intimacy with the audience. And so to see a musician live out their fantasy is more intimate than just seeing them walk up on stage dressed as they would be in the daytime when they're not performing. There's just nothing intimate about that, even though they might think they're being authentic. I'm not interested in authenticity, let's say. I'm interested in intimacy. And what is more intimate than knowing someone's fantasies? I mean, sometimes you're in a relationship for 5 years with someone before you find out what their particular fantasies are. That's personal stuff.
Yeah.
So to go up there and show this bitter and deluded and self-aggrandizing, whatever all those adjectives you can apply to the persona, it's because I dream of being able to be that way, and being on stage allows me to be that way. People clap for it, and it's a very reinforcing process.
Do you think, like, in terms of where you're at now as Chili Gonzales compared to when you're in your first band, Sun, that the experience of being in that band, and you released 3 albums and had a record deal, and it was a thing. It wasn't like a high school band that didn't do anything. It was like the first stage of your career, I guess. How much of that experience do you think has shaped you now and all of the things
100%. That's like the origin story. That's like when lightning hit the laboratory, and I was so traumatized by how that project was perceived, because I sort of naively thought back then, music is enough. Surely everything else will fall together. Like I've gotten signed. End of journey,
Yeah.
And of course I then, realized, maybe it wasn't a good idea to just let them choose the photographer. Maybe it wasn't a good idea to let them choose the stylist, and I'll just wear whatever clothes, because no matter what, the music's going to do the work for me. So I naively thought I was maybe above the work of storytelling around my music, and thought the music is strong enough, it'll tell its own story, and all that other stuff doesn't really matter. I quickly learned I should take control of the storytelling as well, because I won't like the story that sort of emerges, and there has to be a story. To think that music is enough in its own, in a vacuum, in a business sense, in terms of like trying to, find your audience, is naive. If you want to be a pure artist, and I know some people like this, and they just make music literally for themselves, that's a whole different ball game. But I am an entertainer. I don't exist without an audience. There are artists who can exist without an audience. I'm not one of them. So therefore, I'm responsible for the storytelling. And not only that, I've started to really enjoy the storytelling. So once I made it a goal of mine to, learn how to tell the story, see if this can become part of the artwork, see if this can be just as exciting as thinking of music walking down the street. Think of what your next photo will be. Think of the next thing you're going to say in an interview. Think of the next theme you'd like to explore, has become just as much of a sort of reflexive way of being creative as thinking of chord progressions or melodies.
You're genreless in one way, because even though a lot of people might consider you a contemporary classical pianist, for example, there's kind of loads of different strings to your bow. Did you find that being in like an alt rock band in your 20s was just too limiting?
Well, when I first started recording as Chili Gonzales, there wasn't that, the piano was pretty well hidden inside the music, and on stage there wasn't physically a piano there because I was sort of, trying to tour on a shoestring budget at the very beginning, and essentially I was just fascinated by rap performance, and so I thought, well, as it's acceptable in the rap world to just basically have playback and to consider yourself the instrument. So that was good enough for me for those first few years, but that was a way of getting attention and testing out this combination of storytelling and persona and music. And once I sort of realized, okay, I'm onto something, there's a way that I can be myself, although quite exaggerated, and yet make a connection with people. That was extremely encouraging. That was sort of the first test of the rapper's ethos. Then there was a moment where I thought, okay, I've gotten people's attention. This was around 2003, and I'd put out 3 albums. And back in the day, that was still pre-internet, but I'd been on the cover of Jockey Slut. Anyone remember Jockey Slut?
I remember. I do. Yeah.
And The Face. Remember The Face?
Oh, The Face.
How about Sleaze Nation? I mean,
Yeah.
those deep cuts.
Wow, these are
That was
these
my
are
stomping
great
grounds.
British titles,
Pre-piano,
yeah.
that was my stomping grounds, really. And I think ID Magazine might be the only survivor.
Okay.
Anyway, and that was a moment where I thought, okay, I've gotten people's attention. I've proven that to myself, but I need to get back to another part of myself that I haven't really shown to people that is important. And that's the side of me that is respectful of music, the side of me that was taught by my maternal grandfather, who at 3 years old plunked me in front of the piano, and all of a sudden I had access to this machine and this mood where time would just pass for hours and hours and hours, where I felt safe, could express things that were unexpressible in polite society, and it just became an escape, a really positive escape, and also earned me my place in society. I mean, it was so seductive and so addictive, and yet I hadn't really shown that side yet because I'd been busy just trying to make a racket to get people to pay attention to me. So luckily that first piano album, Solo Piano, in 2004 was a way to sort of see, okay, let me go to this other extreme. Let's see how many people can follow me. Let's see if this is of interest to the small, curious audience that I've sort of built up now. And it ended up opening up all kinds of avenues for me. I wasn't even sure if it would just be a little side project and a sort of, a little curio for certain people. Oh, this crazy guy actually knows how to play the piano. But that became sort of a whole thing. All of a sudden, I was, blown away by the level of attachment that people had to the music. I hadn't seen that over those first few years where I was just barking to get people to pay attention. All of a sudden people were saying, yeah, I have this deep relationship with your album. This album helped me, even things like that. And you think, oh, okay, this is a deeper reaction. I want more of this. Let me start chasing this a little bit more. And let me see how I can eventually try to integrate the carnival barker and the respectful child musician, essentially. And I think that started to click probably around 2009, 2010, post Guinness World Record, starting my own label, doing the Ivory Tower album, slowly leading to Solo Piano 2, and up until now, the sort of modern era of what I do. I feel like I've managed to sort of reconcile those two, be those two people simultaneously in my work. And of course, certain albums will always have a certain focus on one side or the other. I'd say the Solo Piano series tends to, it's a bit more idealistic in a way. In a way, maybe you can hear the musician who would wish that music would be enough when I do a solo piano record. And when I do a rap album, you hear much more the musician who wants to break free of that and just only wants impunity. But I feel like every time I do a concert, you see those two things can not only easily coexist, but need to coexist.
Mm. And now that you're at the end of the Solo Piano Trilogy, how does that feel? Do you see this as the final of the
who wants to buy an album called Solo Piano 4? That just sounds weird.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
No, the rule of threes really seems to apply, and I feel like the idea of making piano music that can be listened to passively and actively, which is sort of the point of the Solo Piano records, is it works as background music. I love background music. I believe people deserve good background music, absolutely. Or people who want to listen to it in a closer, more intimate way. That's the sort of test for me for these pieces. Do they work in both of those listening modes? And if it passes that test, then it can sort of make it onto the album. And I may have stretched that as far as it can go with the Solo Piano 3, where I started to find myself wanting to get closer to how I play live. But at the same time, I didn't want to make it so that it feels like a live album, which is the kind of album that, frankly, if it's on the background at dinner and you start to hit too hard and get too dense, someone's going to get up and like turn down the volume.
Yeah.
That means that it doesn't work as a solo piano record to me. I'm not sure in the future if I'm always going to want to make music that has that dual sort of listening capacity, passive and active. Remains to be seen, but I do believe I'll make music alone at the piano. It's great because as I started to do interviews in France, to say alone at the piano is seul au piano. And so I had this perfect little like advertising jingle style thing. I'm like, I'm still going to make music seul au piano, but it won't be solo piano. I had like, it's like a perfect little, but you always find truth in those little turns of phrase anyhow. And it's true. I don't know that I really have something I can add to these 3 albums in terms of what the concept really was.
Yeah, it's kind of reached its natural end point.
It's denouement, to use another French word.
Okay.
However, Jay-Z retired multiple times and like just put out another album last week, so never say never.
No, that's true. You can always come out of retirement.
Maybe prequels. I suppose that would be Solo Harpsichord. The prequel to Solo Piano.
This year, you've also launched your first school program.
That's right, the Conservatory.
The Conservatory, great name, obviously.
Thank you. I thought about it for years, and it was only when the name came to me that it became a reality. Sometimes it's the name. Now I have to do it.
No, I've got to do it because the name's just too good to pass this up. Has it happened already this year? It was an 8-day. Yes. It's an 8-day kind of.
It's an 8-day, very intensive program, really based on performance rather than studio or songwriting. It's about how to create this connection on stage by letting go while at the same time preparing in a very disciplined way for that moment. So that sort of strange, counterintuitive, dance between being essentially a respectful musician and a disrespectful one, and trying to pass that on to certain musicians who've mastered maybe one side of it but not the other. So I had a really wide variety, again, going for this musically humanist approach. So I had like a classical guitarist who was an African-French woman. I had a rapper from Houston, a singer-songwriter from Argentina, a kind of freaky art performance artist musician from Chile, a kind of slightly shy, introverted jazz saxophone player from the Ukraine. I mean, I really had all these different sort of types, and of course representing musicians that I'd known over the years as well. Peaches, who was one of the guest teachers, along with like Jarvis Cocker and a bunch of other people. Peaches said, "It's funny, you chose the students almost as if you were looking for stand-ins for all the musicians who sort of taught you something along the way." And yeah, in a way, I recreated this strange journey of me, essentially a shy person who became good at performing. And so I sort of started to think, well, what if I can recreate those conditions that sort of happened to me by accident over 15 years? If I can compress that into 8 days, turn them into, a real sort of group of friends. Because when I had a group of friends to make music with, we never felt like we were working. So that was the first thing I was looking for. What's a group of 7 who I think will become friends? Not just who are the best 7 people. It was like, what's the best group of 7? That's sort of what was in my mind when I watched over 800 videos to choose these
Wow.
7 musicians. And once I had that group and it felt like, okay, I have a strong suspicion they'll get along as friends, then in a way it was just about teaching the lessons along the way that I learned.
Did they get on? Did they become friends?
100% successful, yeah. I
Wow.
mean, maybe it was a fluke, I'm going to do it again every year, and we'll see next year if there's a sort of proof of concept that if my instincts were really so good that they did get along and feel like a family after just 3 or 4 days of very intensive, living, working, playing, eating, everything together. And we'll see if I can sort of recreate that, because if there had been some really bad sort of social feng shui in the group, I'm not sure I could have gotten as far as we did in those 8 days. You know, they play a concert at the end of the 8 days for 1,000 people live streamed, and the material of the concert is all stuff they wrote while at the conservatory. They leave it all behind.
This is in 8 days.
Yeah, in only 8 days.
Whoa.
Because I have these techniques to get people to write music very, very, very quickly and in groups of 2 and 3. And at some point, they just build trust in every possible constellation of the 7 of them. And that's what bonds them together. They've each had a little experience with each one-on-one, and they're playing sometimes together as a group of 7. And everything they played at that final concert was something that they wrote under either time pressure or just a sort of improvising music game called songing, which is how I write music with my friends sometimes. I mean, Limit to Your Love, which I wrote with Feist and was covered by James Blake, was written using this technique of songing. Songing is essentially, you have a list of titles. You just go, okay, let me write a list of titles that I could imagine could be songs. You just go very quickly, you know. The walls are closing in. My favorite hat. Screw you. Whatever comes to your mind becomes a song title. And then you have this piece of paper in front of you and you just create this space where you say, okay, we're going to go now. I'm going to put my fingers on the keys. You're going to start to sing. And one of those little titles that Feist had come up with was called Limit to Your Love. She didn't know in what way it was supposed to be expounded upon, but we just went for it. Dun, 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 dun. There's a limit to your love. It was written in the amount of time it takes to perform
to hear it. There's so many great songs that's the case, isn't it? Like the best ones are the quick ones.
Exactly. How stupid you have to be if you've had 10 of those experiences. How stupid you have to be to like labor over a song and think that it should take you weeks when secretly you know that the best stuff you've done was when you didn't have time to filter it through your idea of like, is this good? Is this me? Is this what people expect of me? Will people like this? Why do I even do music? What is life? We're all gonna die. You know, it's so existential. Whereas, you know, if someone's just pointing at you and saying, "Hey, man, do a song called Screw You," you're just gonna come up with it. And if you do, at one point we did, I think 40 of them.
Right.
I think 35. It was like I asked the 7 of them to each come up with 5 titles, and in 2 hours, just by pointing at them and telling them the title, we came up with 35 songs. And it was like, okay, let's break for lunch, you know. And at some point, they can't even remember all the songs they wrote when they're working in this way. And then I had a computer where we recorded everything. And at the end of the day, they could go listen, and they could sort of go, oh, there's some truth in that song. It's only a minute long, and it's not perfect, but the spark of it is something they can really trust as a product of their true instinct. And then, of course, you can take months to finish things. I mean, Solo Piano 3, I spent 2 years really finishing the songs, but every song in and of itself was born of a sort of random sound check moment where I just suddenly was like, and I was like, that's something amazing. Okay. And then I take a year and a half to actually finish it. But the spark of it has to be in a moment where you have zero self-consciousness. That's how you're going to find something that really communicates something to people.
Midnight Chats is a loud and quiet podcast. Music courtesy of Gold Panda. Search Midnight Chats on iTunes for more episodes and to subscribe. For more information, visit loudandquiet.com.